The first thing that simply does not make sense when you look at the world around you is America's so-called war on terror. Now, I want to be clear about something before we go any further. I completely understand that America was attacked on September 11th, 2001. That was a real attack. Real people died, and the grief of that day was genuine. Nobody is disputing that. But here is where things stop adding up. If the war on terror was truly about responding to Al-Qaeda, then why did the United States military end up in Libya? Why did they end up in Iraq? Why did they spread across nations that had absolutely nothing to do with the attacks on American soil? You cannot answer that question honestly without opening a door that most people are too afraid to walk through. The official explanation never held water, and the more you pull at the loose threads, the more the entire story begins to unravel in ways that are deeply uncomfortable. The answer, if you are willing to follow the evidence where it leads, points towards something called the Greater Israel Project. The goal, according to those who have studied this framework for decades, is to transform Israel into what is sometimes referred to as Pax Judaea, a supreme, dominant power sitting at the center of the Middle East, controlling the region the way Rome once controlled the ancient world. This is not just a political ambition. Inside certain secret societies and certain old-world power structures, the elevation of Israel to regional dominance is considered almost a sacred obligation, a necessary step in a much larger historical and spiritual plan. When you understand that framing, when you accept that as the underlying motivation, then suddenly the war on terror stops looking like a confused foreign policy disaster and starts looking like an extremely deliberate series of moves on a chessboard. Every country that was destabilized, every regime that was toppled, every city that was bombed into rubble, all of it begins to make a horrifying kind of sense. Now let's talk about what is happening right now, because this is not ancient history. Right now, the United States is openly threatening to attack Iran. Most people hear that and they think it is about nuclear weapons or about regional aggression, and they accept the surface-level explanation because it is easier than questioning the deeper one. But ask yourself, why Iran specifically? Why is Iran the target that keeps coming up again and again? The answer connects directly back to the Pax Judaea framework. Iran is the one remaining significant power in the Middle East that stands as a genuine challenger to Israeli dominance. As long as Iran exists as a functioning, influential nation with military strength and regional alliances, the dream of total Israeli supremacy cannot be fully realized. Iran must therefore be removed from the equation. Not reformed, not negotiated with, not contained, removed. Destroyed in the kind of way that takes a nation a generation or more to recover from. Once that happens, there is no challenger left. The board is clear, and that is precisely why the drumbeat toward war with Iran has never fully stopped, regardless of which political party controls Washington. The third pillar of this larger story is something that hits even closer to home for most people today, and that is Silicon Valley and the explosion of artificial intelligence. Right now, AI is being sold to the public as this revolutionary tool that will change everything, and on the surface, if you look at what most people are actually using it for, it seems underwhelming. You have chatbots that generate images, help students cheat on essays, and hold conversations that feel clever but ultimately hollow. For someone who is not in school, not a developer, not a researcher, the honest question is, why would I pay serious money for this? What problem in my daily life does this actually solve? And the answer, if you are thinking about it as a consumer product, is not much. The numbers do not add up. The hype does not match the reality of the product being delivered to ordinary people. But here is the thing, you are asking the wrong question if you are thinking about AI as a consumer product. The real question is not what can AI do for you, The real question is, what can AI do to you? Because when you zoom out and look at the scale of investment happening right now, hundreds of billions of dollars pouring into data centers, into computing infrastructure, into surveillance hardware all around the world, you realize this level of investment makes no sense if the goal is to sell chatbot subscriptions. It makes perfect sense, however, if the goal is to build a comprehensive, inescapable global surveillance state. We already have a working model of exactly what that looks like. It is called China. Digital ID, digital currency, social credit scores, cameras on every corner with facial recognition running 24 hours a day. Every purchase tracked, every movement logged, every conversation monitored. A complete profile on every citizen that the government can read, analyze, and respond to in real time, not just to watch people, but to shape how they think, to nudge behavior, to reward compliance and punish dissent without ever making a single arrest. That is not science fiction. That is an existing, functioning system. And the AI infrastructure being built right now across the Western world is the foundation for expanding that system globally. This is what the billions are actually buying. This is the product, not the chatbot, the cage. And when you connect this surveillance architecture back to Pax Judia, it fits perfectly. Because a global power does not just need military strength, it needs information. It needs to know what every government is doing, what every population is thinking, where resistance is forming, where loyalty can be bought. A global AI surveillance system gives you all of that and more. It is the ultimate intelligence tool, and it would make the Mossad, already considered by many analysts to be the most effective intelligence agency on the planet, something that operates on an entirely different level from anything that has ever existed before. Now, let us talk about Europe, because the immigration crisis on that continent does not make sense on its own either, not until you place it inside this larger framework. The wars that America fought in Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq did not just destroy those countries. They created a flood of millions of displaced people who had nowhere to go except north and west into Europe. And that flood has caused enormous social tension, political instability, and the beginning of what many Europeans privately fear will become civil conflict. Why would anyone engineer that outcome? Why would the architects of Western foreign policy want to destabilize Europe from within at the exact same moment they are pushing Europe toward a military confrontation with Russia? The answer, again, follows the logic of Pax Judia. A strong, unified, confident Europe is a competitor to any emerging global power. A Europe that is internally fractured, politically polarized, economically drained by war and migration, and culturally at war with itself is not a competitor. It is a casualty. It is removed from the board just like Iran. And while Europe tears itself apart, fighting both Russia on its eastern border and civil unrest within its own cities, it has neither the attention nor the resources to challenge whatever is rising. In the Middle East, America faces the same internal demolition, just by different means. The left-right political divide in the United States has moved far beyond disagreement. These are two populations that do not share information, do not share values, and increasingly do not share a common reality. There is a useful analogy here. Imagine you take a jar and you fill it with red ants and black ants. Left alone, they coexist. But if you shake the jar violently enough, those same ants will tear each other apart. The shaking is deliberate. The polarization is engineered. The media feeds it. The algorithms amplify it. And all it takes is enough random violence, a shooting here, an incident there, for the tribal instinct to take over completely, and then neighbors become enemies. The United States has experienced enormous internal conflict before, and the conditions right now are in many ways more volatile than anything seen in recent memory. Civil unrest, and possibly something far more serious, is not a paranoid fantasy. It is a trend that anyone paying honest attention can see building in real time. Meanwhile, the geopolitical pressure does not stop at America's borders. The United States is already positioning military assets near Venezuela, with roughly 10% of the U.S. Navy reportedly in the Caribbean. A military move into South America would extend American overreach even further at a moment when the country can least afford it. In Asia, the tensions between China, Japan, and India create another front of instability. And perhaps most significantly, America has the tools to economically strangle China through a naval blockade, cutting off the oil and food imports that China depends on, which would cause massive internal suffering in the world's most populous nation and force Beijing into increasingly desperate decisions. All of these separate conflicts, when viewed individually, look like a chaotic and directionless world falling apart. But when viewed together through the lens of what they are making possible, they look like controlled demolition. Every major power being weakened, distracted, or destroyed simultaneously, while one small, technologically advanced nation with the world's most sophisticated intelligence, apparatus, and growing financial infrastructure quietly absorbs the assets and influence being shed by a collapsing American empire. When America finally goes to war with Iran and loses, not in the sense of being defeated militarily, but in the sense of being so damaged, so exhausted, and so despised that it is forced to withdraw from the Middle East entirely, its military infrastructure, its alliances, its weapons contracts, and its financial relationships in that region do not disappear. They transfer, they move to the one stable power left standing, and that power becomes the new center of gravity for global trade, global finance, and global security. There is one final piece to this puzzle that is perhaps the strangest and most unsettling of all, and that is the matter of the red heifers. In certain ancient Jewish texts, the reconstruction of Solomon's temple, which many believe is a prerequisite for the arrival of the Messiah, requires a very specific ritual purification. That purification can only be performed using a red heifer, a perfectly red cow without blemish, one that has never been worked. These animals are extraordinarily rare, and yet in recent years, red heifers meeting the ritual requirements have been located. Some bred through what appears to be deliberate genetic selection, and at least some of the necessary religious preparations have reportedly already taken place. For those operating within this belief system, the red heifer is not a symbol. It is a checklist item, and it appears to be checked. Which means, from their perspective, the physical and spiritual ground is being prepared for something that goes far beyond politics or economics. The Temple Mount in Jerusalem sits at the center of the most contested real estate on earth, and the ambition to rebuild Solomon's temple on that site has the potential to ignite a religious conflict unlike anything the modern world has seen. So what does the next 10 to 20 years actually look like if this framework is correct? It looks like Europe consumed by dual wars, external against Russia and internal against itself. It looks like America bleeding out through civil conflict at home and unwinnable wars abroad, gradually losing its status as the world's dominant power. It looks like China economically isolated, its growth model broken by blockade and resource scarcity. It looks like the Middle East reshaped by the destruction of Iran. And through all of that chaos, it looks like one nation consolidating power, attracting capital, absorbing technology companies, becoming the hub of global trade between a resource-rich Russia and a resource-hungry world, and building a surveillance architecture that makes escape from its influence nearly impossible. Whether you read this through a geopolitical lens, an economic lens, or a theological one, the destination being pointed toward is the same. The pieces are already in motion. The question that remains, and it is the only question that matters now, is whether enough people can see clearly enough and act wisely enough to change where this road ends.